On a quarterly basis, we usually get the Grand Chief's update, just telling us what's been keeping her busy. But it's been 1 year since the election, and we felt it was time to do something a little bit different, have a conversation, and just talk about the year that's been, the challenges, the successes, and basically, you know, just finding out what it's been like to be the Grand Chief. So first of all, let's start right off the top. Just over a year ago, it was a election night, and it was a tough political battle and sometimes difficult. But just what did it feel like on that night when you realized you had the mandate from the people of Kahnawake?
Definitely overwhelming. I mean, it was, like you said, a challenge for sure. You know, I definitely knew we were going to be losing two good people at the council table. And, you know, I think very proud and honored, obviously, to serve in this role, making history and looking forward to, you know, the work ahead. And obviously I had the most experience, I think, of anybody, any of the candidates who are running for the position. So knowing, you know, what I brought to the table, I guess, in terms of that experience and that knowledge, educational background, you know, I guess my involvement in the community, who my family is, a number of things. Not to say that, you know, I was able to stack it. You know, a lot of people say there are popularity contests and all these kind of things, but, you know, really looking at being the right person for the job at the right time and bringing, I guess, a fresh, young perspective and, you know, really looking forward to it. And I think 1 year in, I'm very pleased with the way things have been going. Our council is working very well together, and the portfolios that we were able to distribute, I think we have, you know, people in the right places, and we will be doing a review coming up as soon as we return after the Labor Day break. And yeah, I just, like I said, it was very overwhelming, but very honoring and a very proud moment for myself.
You mentioned young perspective. In more ways than one, currently the council has become younger in terms of years of service, because you and Mike DeLille are the only current members who were here before 2018. Lindsay Laborn, a little different story. He had been on council up until about 2006. Then took a long break. He went back and do ironwork. He came back also this past term. But basically, you're talking
maybe
about
before 2015, because I think Tanya Parra and Ross were here prior, no?
Nope. I went through the documents just before we did this, just to make sure.
Yeah, well,
and that's what really struck me, is that it's really a huge turnaround in the composition of the council. And also, there are some younger council members. There are new council members. On election day, I spent quite a bit of time watching the goings-on, and I couldn't help but notice how many young people came out, and that's probably why you see some of the changes. And, you know, with Alan, John, and Jessica finishing right up there near the top of the... So there is kind of a youth movement going on, if you will. So what has been the biggest challenge with so many new people coming into the political forum like this?
I think getting people acclimated to the whole structure and what is the MCK, right? There's just so much, and I think even the community takes for granted what goes into being a council chief. You have to be responsible for everything on a political level with the federal government, the Quebec government, municipal governments, and then just internal to the community. And then what does that mean in terms of the community? So now you deal with external, I mean, the organizations, the community, you know, in terms of community meetings and different things. And when issues arise, and obviously it was quite a tumultuous couple of years going through COVID and the pandemic, and, you know, just different things with the finding out of the original 215, and, you know, I think now it's at like 10,000. You know, the issue with the Lejoie removal and all of that. So there was just so much, you know, and so I don't think people really realize. And then for council members coming in green and fresh and then having to learn, you know, whether it's the portfolio structure, all of the governance and how we operate and function and the whole organization. And so there's definitely a lot of, I'll say, learning that has to happen. You know, you kind of got to learn to crawl before you walk, I guess, in this position. And it's definitely a major learning curve, I'll say.
You have been on council since 2009, and you know, you've done. I think people like what you've done because obviously your standing in the election always seemed to go up. Now, doing this is a whole different story, and also you're coming in off the heels of a Grand Chief who's a legend, not only a legend, but also passed away while he was in office. And so that has to bring some special challenges itself.
You know, I was actually really honored that I got a chance to work directly with Joe, and as you mentioned, got a chance to work directly with Mike DeLille. So in seeing the different leadership styles, the way they, I guess, led the table, so to speak, what the vision was, and I think I learned different things from both, and you know, I definitely understand it's big shoes to fill. You know, coming in after Joe Norton, and like you said, you know, him being a legend, being most known for, you know, the way he handled the Oka crisis, the presence on the island, and different things. Like, he'll forever be remembered for those things. But not only that, you know, the foresight and vision with economic development and the projects and the things that have happened, whether it was MIT and gaming or, you know, so he definitely took me under his wing, and we did a lot of travel together. We did a lot of discussion and dialogue over the last couple of years, and you know, I really think if he was looking down right now and saying, you know what, Kahsennenhawe is gonna do well for this community, and that, you know, he was happy, I would think that, you know, we did have that time, and I was able to take, you know, some of his good advice and his knowledge and the experience that he had in the time he served here at the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake.
And I noticed lately you're leaning a little more as well on Mike for some of it, because it's just so busy over here. I don't think in the 22 years I've been here, I've seen it so busy with so much going on the different fronts. But when you talk about the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, a lot of people, oh yeah, it's there's so many problems, but there's so many good things going on at the same time.
Absolutely.
That sometimes we have to stop and smell the coffee.
And you have to also take into account that I have an assistant Grand Chief. I don't know if that's ever been done before. And I had told Tanya, I knew she was interested in running for the position of Grand Chief before the election. And I said, look, I need you here. You know, it would be a mistake to have 4 council members run for the position. And I said, you know, if you're successful and I'm successful, this is what I envision your role will be, because I need that kind of stability and support when I'm on vacation, or if I'm out of the office, someone to step in and handle the affairs, whether it's chairing meetings or, you know, setting the agenda, talking to the community. So she's definitely been, you know, my backbone and someone to lean on in the time when I'm away, and she's been phenomenal and got the most votes. So I think the community also saw, you know, the value in her and her experience as a lawyer, and you know, what she brought to the table. So it was an easy confirmation. The rest of the council was in full agreement, and I think it's something we're going to have to look at through, you know, the governance documents, where it's the election law, to have this permanent kind of position as an assistant Grand Chief.
In Kahnawake, you were the first ever Grand Chief, but I think Kahnawake got used to that pretty quick.
Female Grand Chief.
Sorry, the first female Grand Chief. But what happened was that on the outside, it's incredible how much attention you have received and continue to receive. And not only from the political side, but from the social side as well. And how have you been able to manage, you know, the job of being the Grand Chief, but having these extra requests that come in? Because again, I've been doing this job for a long time, and under Mike and under Joe, both were, you know, they had a lot of media requests, but I've never, and none of us ever saw the crazy numbers. Everybody wanted to talk to you, and it's still going on. How do you manage that?
Well, like you said, I have to know my boundaries and my limits. There has to be times when I say no. There has to be times when I defer to other council members. I mean, it's not a one-woman show, so to speak. That's why there's 11 other council members, and you know, just being able to field and pick and choose which ones I feel are I'll have the most impact, if you will, or the ones that I feel are important to me on a personal level, and you know, just finding ways to accommodate everything. I actually made a list of some of the notable things that I've been a part of in the last year, and I even was saying to you, like, how am I going to cover 2 pages worth, you know, in a, I guess, a segment like this for people to hear a year in review, but it's been extensive, and that's why I said, for me, it's been a real honor to represent the community at this level, and obviously the cultural background and being able to do, whether it's openings or closings, talking from this perspective about, you know, the way we understand things and the interconnectedness through Ohondogari Wadekwa. You know, there's a real education that's happening now to people on the outside, and they're more aware and cognizant now about Indigenous issues, what our reality has been, what we've been through the Indian residential school experience, Indian day school experience. So, you know, their eyes wide open now, and never have I seen more non-Indigenous people wanting to be our allies, wanting to work with us, wanting to build up our economy, and just see us, you know, prosper now into the future and be, you know, on our own 2 feet.
Right off the bat, you hit the ground running. And I remember, I think you were in for just maybe a month or so, and one of the first things that happened is you get invited from the president of Mexico to visit down there, and really that set the stage, I think, for what's been a nonstop roller coaster of meeting, visits, travel, and stuff like that. First of all, the Mexican trip was one that, I guess, with all that was going on, it almost got lost in the shuffle. But
yeah,
that was a really important one, you know?
It was. It was actually just the anniversary on Saturday, August 13th. And there was some real significance about that date, that I was even considering doing some kind of ceremony in the community, like a planting of a, you know, a great tree of peace, a white pine tree. And then what ended up happening is, through chance and people who knew me, put my name forward, and like you said, I was invited by the president of Mexico to go to an event called 500 Years of Indigenous Resistance. So it brought people from Mexico, from the United States, and myself being from the north, you know, I hate to say being from Canada, but you know what I mean. So they basically wanted all representation across Turtle Island to come to this event to honor and acknowledge that it has been now 500 years, and it was the fall of the Mexican civilization and the way they knew things before the Spanish conquest and all that. So they say the fall of Tenochtitlan, and I was a keynote speaker, and so there planted that seed of bridging the relations also with our brothers and sisters to the south. You know, and I mean the far south, like South America, Mexico, and so forth, because there's Indigenous people, you know, all around, and I think we sometimes take for granted about, you know, the nations here or the tribes in the US, but, you know, there's also the people down there, and they're doing the work as well to try to reclaim, whether it's their language, their culture, and after everything that's happened to their people as well.
There seems to be a movement almost globally about recovering those things. The challenge is doing it in a way that works for everyone and is not always a battle where you see people, you know, the resentment being so bad that you can't move forward. That's been a challenge, because even if you look at the current situation here with the 215 people, residential school, the 215 kids in the residential schools and all that, everybody wants reconciliation, but there's so much history that it's hard to sometimes move forward without letting the anger or the disappointment or the hurt overwhelm those efforts. So that's a challenge even internally that you
Right.
know that you as the Grand Chief and the rest of council has to look at.
Well, we learned, some valuable tools at the early onset by doing some trauma training and understanding, what has happened to our people. And we're not just talking about through the residential school, but even the government, and putting us on reserves and having this even style of government and the way that they related to us, having the Indian agent in the community, the Indian Act. Like, you put it all on paper, and when you look at it and you're like, wow. And the thing is, what we do is, because we can't find a way to address it directly with these institutions, that's how we get lateral violence. We take it out on each other. So unless you actually see and go through one of these trainings, so then I don't take it personally, because I know it's not my fault. I'm equally born into all this dysfunction just like everybody else. But the thing is, what are you doing about it? Like you said, we could have this kind of mentality where it's like, we feel sorry for ourselves and we stay stagnant and angry and frustrated, or we could change and ensure, like we talk about 7 generations thinking, creating a legacy and a better future for the faces yet to come. So that's the kind of space that I want to come from. And I think a good majority of people in the community who have done the work of overcoming trauma and things that have happened in their lives. And when we understand things from our culture and our teachings about that notch on the stick, and we have a very short time here. So what do you want to be remembered for? Someone who just complained all the time, or someone who actually got involved and tried to make positive changes for the community?
That is one of the keys to what we've seen in the first year is exactly that. There are other priorities. As a matter of fact, council came up with a list of priorities. They do this every term.
Right.
With all of the things that are going on and all the issues, have you been able to maintain the priorities in more or less a workable fashion, or has there been too much to try and keep it on track?
Well, obviously, because we were still in the throes of the COVID pandemic and what happened last year with the decision to implement the vaccine passports and different things like that. And, there was definitely a different feel in the community. We weren't as cohesive. We couldn't have community meetings. We tried to do different things, whether it was kiosks or whatever. But when we came up with the priorities, and I'll name the 3, obviously, language and culture has always been, in the last years that I've been on the council, at the forefront of our priorities, and ensuring that service delivery and that we augment programs, we find more revenues. Obviously, the Cultural Center project is a big, major endeavor for the community, but it's something that's long overdue. Then we had the overall health and wellness of the community, because we need, based on everything I just talked about and everything we've been through and I'm not just talking about in the last 3 years, we're talking 500 years, right, through that trauma training and the understanding of colonialization. There's still a lot of hurt out there, but until, as a community, that we could keep doing these activities and events similar to what we did on the weekend with, having positive events, a wellness action team now, medicine lacrosse games and tobacco burnings every month, and just trying to bring people into a more positive space and cohesiveness after it felt like the pandemic kind of really polarized us and tore the community apart, whether you were on one side of an issue or not, So I think keeping on and doing these kind of activities are going to be good for our community. And then the last thing was about external government relations. Obviously, Bill 96 passed in the last couple of months, and you saw our reaction, not just Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, but all the organizations, the youth, the walkout from survival school, so it felt like old times. When the community has a common threat, a common enemy, we find a way to pull together. And it's unfortunate that we don't do this more often. It's always when, like I said, there is something that's lurking and coming at us, that we find a way to pull together. And So a minor victory on Friday, like with the announcement that 2 parts of the Bill 96 is going to be struck down through the legal system anyways, and Chief Tanya Perron put an affidavit forward basically talking from 3 perspectives as, you know, a council chief, as a lawyer, and then someone who went to school and saw the challenges of having to pass, you know, the French language bar and so forth, and the challenge that's going to put on our future, you know, young leaders who want to maybe go into that field.
Yeah, and the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake actually got some recognition there in the story, because it was a group of lawyers who were talking about the actual translation, the requirement that they wanted everything to be translated into French before it became, you know, it was just a real problem. Mm-hmm. But we went not as a party to it, but as an interested party, mm-hmm. not participating in the actual lawsuit. But the fact that, you know, we our legal team put out what they did, it shows it is having an impact out there as well from the outside communities, the English-speaking community, saying the Mohawks are fighting sometimes harder than we are. And that's exactly what I heard from a friend of mine last night. You guys are fighting harder than us. You know, we're an inspiration to them sometimes. There have been, of course, always challenges. Bill 96 was one. What are some of the other challenges? Because we have some good news coming up, but mm-hmm. we'll hit the tougher stuff, the bad news first, and then the good news. So what were some of the other major challenges in your first year?
Well, obviously, like I said, with the pandemic and, you know, having to declare state of emergency, non-state of emergency, and then finally at one point declaring the state of normalcy. And although we know COVID is still here, as a matter of fact, there's people in our office that are current impacted by it. It's still around us, you know, but we've learned to, I guess, live with it. You know, it's the new norm now, like a flu, but there's still people dying, and I think, you know, we did the best possible in terms of the decisions that we made. And, you know, again, I know it was very difficult on the community to feel like, you know, their rights or their freedoms were being stripped by asking them to, you know, adhere to certain directives and, you know, decisions we were making to protect the community as a whole. But, you know, I think to this point there might be 2 COVID-related deaths, if I'm not mistaken. And in the grand scheme of things, and in comparison to other sister communities, you know, we did an amazing job. And it's not just a testament to, again, the task force or the council. It was the community. The community had to take it seriously and do everything possible for themselves, their families, and ultimately our community and our nation. And we came out, I think, really good. So that was definitely a challenge. You know, you try to do the best. You know, you know you're not going to please everybody. People hate you. They're going to call you down. They're going to say whatever. But at the end of the day, you know, you make decisions that you think are going to have the most impact in protecting everybody. So
I think what strikes me about the whole thing is that from this window you can see the Heron retirement home in Dorval. You can look and it's there. It's not that far away. Mm-hmm. Over 100 people died there. Mm-hmm. And here we have our Elders Lodge, Catawba Memorial Hospital Center, the Assisted Living Center, and we were able to navigate that without anyone passing away. Mm-hmm. So again, very, very great work. Maybe a little luck involved as well, but everybody had to pull together, and they did. Mm-hmm. What were some of the other ones that were tough this year? Mm-hmm.
Obviously the Lajoie issue that we just got resolution with, you know, and trying to find the best way forward. I guess coming to that community decision or plebiscite vote to come to a resolution. Obviously people felt that Mohawk Council made a mistake, if you will, in 1999 by allowing it based on the membership issue and so forth. And so nonetheless, it got concluded on August 10th. He was removed and, to my understanding, interred back to where the Jesuit priests are buried. And, you know, it was definitely a challenge to, you know, hear both sides in terms of, you know, what this meant and the impacts on the community. Because a lot of people were afraid, you know, of that term gariwaksas, you know, like bad medicine or we don't do this. And But ultimately, I think the priest himself probably would not have wanted all of this division and, people having all this negative feeling about his presence here. So he probably would have wanted to have been removed anyways.
Yeah, sometimes I know we talk about consensus and consensus building, that's part of the way, but every once in a while there's an issue that just completely is not going to have a win-win. Mm-hmm. I guess in the end we have to say that this one is always going to have was always going to have people being upset on every side.
Yeah.
So, a tough one,
yep.
That's for sure.
And I'm just happy now that it's gotten to that point where hopefully, people who felt that it was a hindrance to their healing can start on that journey, and even the ones who felt that, his removal for them is painful, that for them as well, so all around. And that's why I said these activities that we're doing of bringing the community together is more important now than ever, that we all heal.
That's right. Well, there was lots of good news this year. You mentioned one earlier, of course, the project that will bring a new cultural center, a new museum, a new theater, a new community space. Mm-hmm. This project's been talked about for so long, mm-hmm. and it came at a good time because during your first term, they actually had to close the old cultural center because now it's condemned. Yeah. And so it's like, I guess it was fortunate that there's space available in the office complex. Mm-hmm. But then came the big announcement that now it looks like with years of planning, it is really going to move forward. Big announcement from the feds who said they're going to kick things off with
$16 million well, not donation, but contribution to the
project.
project.
Yeah. So I know for you, the language and culture was your portfolio before that. You're one who has been, I think, a role model to a lot of younger people because you are a speaker. And you always like to say that, well, I'm not a great speaker, a good speaker even, but you're pretty good. And I think the fact that you publicly do this stuff and you become a role model that way. But for someone like you and others, it's like this project itself is a cornerstone to the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know that even in the 70s, there was a movement from the community to have the cultural center in that exact location. The foundation is even still there, yes. But unfortunately, we weren't as financially astute, I guess, back then, or had the means, or even to envision this kind of fundraising capital campaign. And we even have, like I said, partners from the outside that are willing to help us now get this, whether it's 50 million, because the estimates keep changing with the cost of building materials going up and so forth. So, we're at the stage now where we have the conceptual designs, we have the location, we did the feasibility study, everything looks good. So it's just a matter now of getting the money and doing all of the preparatory work. And there's been, like you said, so much work and excitement around the project because of all of the proponents who need a permanent space. The Cultural Center has never had its own building. They were at the K103 building once upon a time, then the old Step by Step, which is a school, redesignated how many times, Kahnawake RC, I think even at one point through the Indian Day School papers. But, when they moved in there, like you said, it was already condemned. And I don't know if people realize that. So, we couldn't just leave our cultural center who holds the mandate on behalf of the community, in a place like that. And it was almost embarrassing, right? We're bringing ministers and people from the outside, and, the roof was leaking and there's squirrels in there and the air conditioning, the smell of mold. It was like, it's time. We got to do something. And then when we said, well, let's find other people who need a permanent space, Turtle Island Theater Company and the musical entertainers and, all that great work that went into looking at, like, people who are now in the arts, Devery Gowanahari Jacobs, Tracy Deer, Brittany LaBorne, like we have talented actors.
And all of those people came from Turtle Island.
That's right.
When they were young. I mean, the list goes on and on. And but so the fundraising goes on.
Yeah.
And there was a donation made
from Mohawk Online.
Mohawk Online, which is actually even more impressive in some ways because this is money that is self-generated.
Right.
It's one of the issues we had, when we talk about our how we run the community, the monies that we have, and when we had the pandemic and we had to help put money out for people.
15 million.
So much of it came from monies that we made ourselves.
Yeah,
so
and we put aside for a rainy day. That's
Yeah.
good governance. You have reserves for emergency situations, and like you said, MOL definitely kicked in there as well. And we expensed $15 million, whether it was for the Business Interruption Fund or for what we called KERM, Kahnawake Economic Relief Measures, that individuals who were impacted if their industry was closed down, those are monies that came from MCK that could have been used for other things. But like we said, we put it aside because you never know what's going to happen, and that's, a good government has a certain amount in reserves that, we were prepared.
One of the other possible funding sources comes from something that I think a lot of people didn't see coming. The work towards getting an agreement with Hydro-Quebec
Oh, yeah.
to send power to New York. And the announcements were made, and I think what struck me was your relationship with the president of Hydro-Quebec. It was interesting that the meeting room was upstairs from where the cultural center moved, and so the president was like, wow, with all that's going on, it made her think that maybe some of the monies might come from a source such as that. And of course the deal with Hydro-Quebec itself is astounding. I mean, if you look at what it means and how the recognition was given that it's running through our ancestral territory, so we should have a stake in it, is something that's never been done before.
That's right. It's groundbreaking, unprecedented, and for us to be at the forefront of that. You mentioned the relationship with Sophie Brochu, CEO, is also a first-time woman being in that position, and just looking at how we were able to hit it off and talk about this isn't always just about money. It's about people and how people relate to each other, how we can work together, how we could create a better future, because obviously our relationship with Hydro in the past wasn't always the greatest. There was land expropriations here. We know about the history of the flooding of indigenous lands in the north, and we said, you have to do something now that show indigenous people that you're willing to find a better way forward. And although this project specifically doesn't really have any more environmental damaging that it's going to do, it's underground, it's about this big, it's not going to be what I feel is too much of an impact. But in terms of the lowering of the emissions, through pollution and the way things are going in New York, like if ever you see all of the smokestacks from the nuclear plants and different things like that, there's a whole neighborhood called Asthma Alley now that, and it's always the marginalized communities, Black, Hispanic. So for us to go there and talk about things from an environmental perspective, and again, through Ohondagariwadekwa and the way we understand things, we want to get involved in economic development projects that take into account environmental stewardship and the part of our priorities and principles.
You mentioned in there, Sophie Brochu, for her first time CEO for Hydro-Quebec as a woman, you, first Grand Chief in Kahnawake as a woman. There are other women, and you actually met with that. That was one of the things that you did, was you had a meeting with all of the first time women, in various positions. And
Mary Simon, the Governor General, Roseanne Archibald, the first time National Chief of the AFN Assemblywoman, and then Mandy Gulmasti, the first Grand Chief of the Cree Nation as a woman. So the four of us met, I want to say that was in, and I wrote it down, November 8th. And we met in Rideau Hall, and it was just like, can you imagine the meetings that must have taken place in this space, applauding against Indigenous people and white paper policies and all these kind of things. And here we are now, 4 Indigenous women in leadership meeting in this space. It was kind of profound.
I think it was. The fact that there's there are more women in positions of influence or power. I mean, we've had this discussion many times in many groups, but I think the men have made a mess of a lot of things, and maybe it's time for women to have a crack at it, because they can't do any worse than the men have done in terms of leadership and politics, which brings us to politics. Because, of course, politics is the big thing. It's been, again, really challenging. We've, with Quebec and Bill 96, that's been at the forefront. But the real challenge has been not only that, but just the relationship with Quebec, because, you know, you have one step forward and 5 steps back, but in the last few years, it seems like since the CAQ government's been there, it's been very few steps forward. It's been almost impossible to get a meeting. It has been impossible to get a meeting with the Premier. And there's been, since Bill 96, sorry, the relationship has kind of been put on hold for a while. So tell us a little about that.
So I had my first meeting with Minister Lafreniere, Yann Lafreniere, who is the Minister of Indigenous Affairs for Quebec, on July 23rd of last year. And we kind of set out, you know, like how we felt we would have a relationship with one another, like immediately exchange cell number, you know, if ever anything comes up, call me, text me, you know, we could try to nip it in the bud right away before things get too big. We talked about a relationship framework, what that looks like, how many times a year, you know, we should meet, what should be the priorities. Obviously, we had the 99 agreements, that some of them are outdated. We have 16 different sectoral tables that we work with the government of Quebec. So obviously we need each other, you know, to ensure that all of these things are working. And, you know, some of the sectoral tables are like transport, you know, think of all the cars that traverse our territory, and, you know, the roads, the maintenance. We have the one with step by step and early childhood, daycares. I could go on and on of all the different ones, but the thing is, we needed this, and we definitely had some resistance in terms of the language, you know, concepts of Degani Deohade and Turo, and them understanding that, you know, we're our own nation and people long before Quebec people came here and established this, you know, government and their regime, and that, you know, we need this coexistence. So always trying to educate them as well, right? Because they definitely come from this space of superiority, and we can see that through the Bill 96 stuff, right? That the French language is the official common language of Quebec, and which completely dismisses, you know, our existence, and that predates theirs here on these lands. And, you know, we're definitely going to continue to challenge them on their thinking, to the point of where we want exemption from the French Charter, not just Bill 96, because ultimately this all stems out of Bill 101. And like we said, the early foundations of the Kahnawake Survival School from the walkout from Billings. So there's definitely been a continuous, you know, resistance from the Kanien'kehá:ka of Kahnawake in this regard when it comes to the French language and, you know, French culture, so to speak. And they should understand where we come from, you know, because we want the same things. And I know they're trying to propose right now a special legislation that protects Indigenous languages and cultures, and I'm of the opinion that that's our role and responsibility. We don't need the Quebec government to do that on our behalf, but if anything, they should be allocating more resources to ensure that we continue on this path.
It's funny, that if you look at the Catherine Memorial Hospital Center, it was founded, not founded, but when it was rebuilt and expanded, because that was another facility that was on its last legs. It was done between Kahnawake and Quebec on a nation-to-nation basis, and was by René Lévesque, who was, everyone knows, was a separatist government. But he was able to say, you know what? We're trying to do the same thing in many ways. We're trying to save our language and culture, and you're doing the same, and we should see, you know, meet on that basis, and, you know, follow the parallel paths. But it's funny that, you know, the Legault government is not quite seeing it that way. They want, instead of being parallel this way, they want to be up here, parallel, but above everyone else, and that's been the frustration.
Absolutely.
So you got, I guess you got your work cut out for you. How do you feel like, what does the future look like in terms of the relationship there?
I'm very skeptical, I have to be honest. I mean, some of the interviews I've seen him do and the attitude, and I'm hopeful that maybe I could try to change his perspective and mindset. I mean, like I said, through this whole update, it's been about how you relate to people, how you speak to people, how you come across to people, and giving that little bit of education and history about the Ganyagahaga, about Radinusuni people. And I do have an upcoming meeting with the premier. That's been, like you said, 4 years in the works. Our late Grand Chief never had the opportunity to meet with the premier, and because of this political embargo, as you mentioned, that we halted all political relations with Quebec until I could have this meeting. It is taking place tomorrow, which will be Tuesday, August 16th. And, I definitely hope to, bring a message that's strong, but at the same time diplomatic, and that we need to have this relationship. Otherwise, our futures will not be good. We talk about Kahnawak's economic leakage and the fact that we don't have, malls and car dealerships and all these. We spend the majority of our money in the surrounding municipalities. So if everybody's going to kind of dismiss us and not recognize our jurisdiction, our language, our culture, our way of doing business in this region, and that it's our original footprint. There's all these land acknowledgements that are going on now through Jogge, Montreal Canadians, City of Montreal, you name it. Well, if you recognize that this is the unceded and traditional territory of our people, well, then act like it, and let's have a relationship built on these principles of coexisting and nobody being above the other.
Well, that takes care of Quebec, but what about Canada?
So I definitely had a good relationship with Minister Miller, even in his previous role as an MP, coming from the riding of Montreal, and through the years that we've had numerous run-ins with each other, and had a grown a friendship, so to speak. And seeing him now in this role as the Minister of Indigenous Affairs for the federal government, I had to highlight just how disappointing our relationship has been with Canada as well. We had absolutely zero traction with the SSSL file grievance, no movement. We asked him to appoint a Minister Special Representative to basically unlock some of these issues that we're having and why things aren't moving. And again, it goes back to the framework and how people don't want the principles of the two-row in some of that relationship documents. And we said it's necessary, and I definitely feel that even the membership issue, for a long time, that was a file that I was on, and I don't really like to use that terminology, but that's the way it still is in the Indian Act and the way they understand registration and Section 6. How do you pass UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but still have the most oppressive legislation that controls the lives of Indigenous people in Canada, the Indian Act, and they don't reconcile with each other? So they have some work to do also in the border crossing realm, which I've been a part of those J Treaty Border Alliance meetings and trying to get the government to sit down and realize that they haven't been holding up to their obligation of that treaty by recognizing U.S.-born Ungwehwe to come into this country and have the same kind of privileges and benefits like we would have if we went to the United States, with being able to live there, go to school, get a job, social insurance, all of that. So the reciprocity has not been existent, and we definitely got the ministers now where we want them to at least sit down and let's brainstorm what this could look like.
Well, if we recall when Prime Minister Trudeau was first elected, one of the first things he said was one of his top 2 priorities is Canada's Indigenous people and the issues there. So if you had to grade that so far, what would you say?
They're C and D.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to get some A and B, in the next little while. And like I said, hopefully through my leadership and with that of the support of this present council, that we can definitely get some work moving. Our external government relations portfolio team consists of myself as the lead. We have Chief Mike DeLille responsible for QKR, which is the Quebec-Ganawage Relations. Ross Gugurdegeru-Mator responsible for the Canada, the KCR, Ganawage Canada Relations. And then also Cody Daibo, coming in and wanting to get more involved and learning the ropes, so to speak, in terms of intergovernmental, and who's involved more with the municipal relations, so all the surrounding mayors, MRC, etc. And then myself trying to do more like nation work, so meeting through the Iroquois Caucus. Also, there's so many First Nations out there, like through the AFN, through the AFNQL, that we've been able to establish linkages and, desire to improve our relations and come up with different, whether it's business opportunities, sharing of our documents, whatever's, of interest to them. Like our whole governance framework now for the council has evolved tremendously under myself, Jessica, and Tanya. And yeah, so we have a lot of good things going on, and people look at Ganawage as a leader, and they definitely want to work with us.
I know that there's so much that we could talk about that we could easily be here all day, but you mentioned the governance project, something we haven't talked about yet, but I wanted to just touch on that because this is something that's kind of, I know it was dear to your heart, and we have Gerald Dayaga Alfred on this, who is, everybody knows, and it's moving along quite well. So just give us a brief synopsis where we're at on that.
Okay, so I have to highlight the fact that the governance project was in two different sections, if you will. The first one was MCK governance, so dealing with the Council of Chiefs, how we operate, operations, terms of reference, code of conduct, which was a new document that we didn't have, address code, different components, that basically governs how we function. We talked a little bit about the portfolio structure and all that. After we finalize everything internal to how we operate, now it shifted to Ganawage governance. And what does the community think governance should look like in the future? I mean, we have the shared 2029 community vision statement that says at that time, the people will be the government, and, we all have a say in the future, in the direction of where things are going. So if people don't want the elected system and we want something that's more representative and reflective of, our traditional way of governance, then we can do that. We can do anything we put our minds to, I think, as a community, as the collective of Ganawage. But it has to be something that, we could all live with and get behind. And I think that's part of the problem in our community right now when we talked about, all of the colonialism and the grievances and what people have, hang-ups they have, is that, even this system is not representative of who we are and our history. It was kind of imposed on us, like we said, through the Indian Act, but over time we've evolved, we made it ours. This is community governance at the highest level. I don't have a Canadian flag in here. I don't answer to anybody in Canada. Our marching orders and our constituency, being the community, is who our boss is, so to speak. So I think, moving forward, hearing what the community has to say about governance, if they're happy with the way things are running, and like I said, it's still evolving. I have visions of actually changing the whole branding of the MCK. I think there's too much hang-ups and too much negative history. I mean, people told me that, being a part of the elected system, you still carried a burden of what happened with the Seaway on your shoulders. And I'm like, I wasn't even born, but that's the perception, right? Once you get in here, you carry all of that. So let's change the way we do things then and say, we're going to move towards getting out of the Indian Act, but let's come up with a plan. What does the plan look like? What's the transition? How do we select government then in the future, or representatives to make decisions? Because it could just be the elected council becomes, like the
administration, perhaps. Or
yeah,
like that.
But the thing is, we're doing it all right now. Like I said, political, dealing with the community, dealing with other nations, and so if by all means people don't want it to be us or this council, then what do you want? We have two longhouses in the community. I'm not even sure at this point. But I know there's a growing movement. You could see it. People are, you know, they want to reconnect. And what is it then? Where are we? What's the direction we're going? And I'll work with anybody. You know, like I said, there's a lot of people out there who have they're visionaries, and then there's people who are actioners and who can make it happen. So I think, you know, bringing people together in that space through that work, and Gerald will come back with a report of what he heard, and then we can go to the drawing board. You know, it doesn't have to stay the elected MCK council for the future. If we want to change it, that's our prerogative to do so as a community.
Just a couple of quick questions to finish up. One, how do you think this first year was for you yourself? Were you happy with it, or you frustrated? Just where are you at?
Honestly, like when I look at, and we talked about there's negatives and positives, but I think our community, we have so much good, you know, in comparison to other First Nations communities that might be remote and desolate and so forth. Our young people have everything here for them to succeed. All of the supports that you could possibly, you know, envision. And the beauty of it is it's all run by our people. So our people had visions in terms of taking on these responsibilities and taking it away from, you know, like I said, there's always been this kind of perception from the outside, like, oh, the little Indians that we need to take care of. It's a whole different generation now. We're educated, we understand more, we're becoming stronger in our sense of identity and ourself as Ngwehunwe, and you know, we're going to continue on that path, and you know, just having I think people in leadership positions for the youth to look up to. You know, hearing that from young people makes me feel you know, like I'm doing right by my community, and that if young people are looking up to me saying, you know, I look at you as a role model, you know, we definitely need more of that, you know, to show that there's so much that we're capable of. And just looking around this community and seeing all of the institutional capacity, I guess, that people put their hearts and souls into doing for our people, like, the future to me is very bright, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
All right. Well, we talked about an awful lot, and I know you do have quarterly updates coming up in the future, so we'd like to thank you for taking the time to get into all of these topics today. It's been 1 year for Kahsennenhawe Sky-Deer as Wahanda Yandani Ratizahayas. So thank you for watching. Nyao Koa and Nyao Gus, and we shall see you somewhere down the line.